continue to focus on as a way to create a sustainable, long-term, cash-flowing business that can support the issuance of prefs. An interesting number that we like talking about, because we have, our most recent announcement for our perpetual preferreds is paying 4.9% dividend rate on face value on our preferreds. And so for every $1 million of revenue that we can generate that's recurring, we can support $20 million worth of Bitcoin purchases. And so it's incredibly effective. It's a nice kind of amplified effect. And so generating recurring revenue is incredibly important.
Any other questions? Don't be shy.
Can you elaborate on the options that you use? Are they put options, or do you do call options, write call options as well?
I'm really having trouble hearing. It's both. So without wanting to share too much about the intricacies of what we're doing, we are selling Bitcoin options. It's selling put options and call options depending on market conditions. It is the capital that we have in our Bitcoin income generation strategy is completely segregated from our core holdings. And so now we have 30,000 plus Bitcoin that's on chain for everyone in the world to see and verify on their own. Separately, we have cash put aside for our income generation strategy. And so in that strategy, we sell puts, we sell calls, depending on whether we have dollars as collateral or Bitcoin as collateral. So if you don't mind, we're going to start calling on you guys to ask us questions. We'll ask you questions.
Who you making calls? Sure. Another question.
Like I do, why don't you write call and put options on MSCI stock also? I mean, that would be another way. If the MSCI stock goes below, one of the strategies could be to buy MSCI stock.
Yeah, so the question is, why not sell options on MicroStrategy or strategy rather than Bitcoin? It's a good question. The volatility on MSTR is higher than Bitcoin more generally. It stems from the fact that we're a natural buyer of Bitcoin. So if we sell a put option on Bitcoin, we want to buy the Bitcoin usually, versus because that's a long-term treasury asset. Versus if we sell put on MicroStrategy or another company, that's not something that we want to hold for the long term. And so the option selling strategy on Bitcoin sort of, very much fits nicely into our long-term holding strategy. In terms of, how we do it and how we execute your kind of prior questions, it's really not one case fits all. It's depending on the market conditions. It's depending on, whether the market's volatile, the market, sometimes one-day volatility or one-week volatility, is flipped. Sometimes 1 month volatility is much more favorable. And so, we look at these things really, really closely. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach for us. It also depends on kind of the capital markets and, whether we're fundraising or not. So, we're very sophisticated in our implementation here, but the end result is we have cash flow and assets to support our preferred obligations.
Hey, can you guys talk a little bit about Bitcoin in Japan and just the maturity of the market there?
So Japan used to be where all the movers and shakers in the early days of Bitcoin were based. Japan has always been a place that's at the forefront of technology. And so Bitcoin was definitely a place where I guess a lot of innovation happened in the early days. We all know that an unfortunate event happened there with Mt. Gox back in 2012, 2013, and I think that set Japan back for a period of time. But I think Metaplanet is doing a lot there to bring people out of the woodwork, which is incredibly exciting. There's been an annual Bitcoin meetup in Japan that has taken place since as early as that time. And as of the beginning of last year, it was the same small group of people that attended this. when we have our shareholder meetings now, we have thousands of people in attendance. And so what's really exciting is we're finally finding a way to bring people out of the woodwork. People that are discovering Bitcoin through Metaplanet. They're buying Metaplanet shares and then asking the question, what does this company do? And then learn about Bitcoin. And so one of the goals that we have for Metaplanet is to be a thought leader in Bitcoin in Japan, to help onboard more people into the Bitcoin world. We would like Japan to be a Bitcoin superpower, kind of alongside the US and many other countries in the world. And so we definitely encourage everyone here to come visit us in Japan. We have an annual shareholder meeting, which is very well attended. We are expecting probably 5,000+ people to attend in March. We rented an arena in Yokohama. So please, I'd love to see your faces there as well.
Yeah, just quickly on the tax question in Japan, how does that look like? And do you work with the regulator and the tax office coins, but also the shares? How does that look like? What's your sense for going forward?
So the taxation of digital assets in Japan currently is in a bit of a no man's land. And so because Bitcoin is not a financial asset, it's basically taxed as personal income. And that means it could be as high as 55%, versus if you buy a stock, and the stock tax would be 20%. Japan has a new program called the NISA program, which is effectively a tax advantage account. And so it's possible for Japanese individuals to buy stocks in their NISA account and pay no tax. And so for the past year and a half, Metaplanet was the best and most tax-efficient way for Japanese individuals to get leveraged exposure to Bitcoin. And that has been a way for us really to onboard a very large number of people into Bitcoin through Metaplanet. Now that situation won't always be the case. We certainly would like to see that Bitcoin becomes a financial asset, because that just increases the size of the market. Now the market is still relatively small, and so with the larger market, we think that many more people will get involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem. But even still, it's incredibly early days. That tax advantage still remains. But yeah, the taxation shouldn't be so high, and the fact that it could be as high as 55% really makes it the highest taxation of any country in the world. But the government is very much focused on that, and we wish to engage with the regulator and the authorities to make Bitcoin something that is more prevalent, more easily acquired, and we want Metaplanet to be that, to be the way that they get exposure.
I saw some kind of research from some of the Japanese analysts on this in regards to the tax change, and it looks like, assuming there is positive regulation in this regard in 2026, the earliest optimistic time frame, if everything goes according to plan, is Jan 1, 2027. So it's at least 12 years out, but this is like using precedent from previous tax change rules in Japan. But I think that's the optimistic case. It wouldn't be surprising at all to see push maybe a year out from there. So 2027, 2028, maybe.
Thank you, sir. I got two questions. First of all, I would like to ask you a question, Darren. I saw your tweet the other day, not really the other day, I mean maybe last year. Since the initial announcement of Scratch from MicroStrategy, and you mentioned about the monetary trilemma. And could you elaborate on that and apply that to this company? And the second question is that you mentioned as well the adoption in Japan of Bitcoin in the corporate treasury. How it benefits a company in Japan as a whole compared to maybe I originally from Indonesia, because it's getting more adopted lately, but at the same time it cannot apply the way you apply it to. So I think it's
Okay, so I'll take the first one. I'm impressed you remember tweets from that far back. So the question, or the post in question was regarding, was regarding the monetary trilemma. And so this is a phenomenon in economics for sovereign countries and central banks. And so you can choose for any issuer of a currency, you can choose two of three things. You can choose the open capital market via free markets. You can choose to set your own interest rates, or you can choose to control the exchange rate of your currency. You can't have all three. So for instance, the US has open free markets, and they set their own interest rates, but the price of the money relative to other currencies, the price of the dollar relative to the euro, or gold, or the yen fluctuates, right? And so if you think of an example like Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong has their currency pegged to the dollar. So they choose to have an open market, they peg the price, but they don't get to control their interest rates, right? If you think of maybe like some form of dictatorship, they close their markets, right? And they close their markets, but they get to set the price and set the interest rate. But if they have an open market, they couldn't do both of those things. So that's sort of the trilemma, right? And so if you think of the first preferreds that say are issued, right? They set the dividends, but the price is volatile. Right? So Stretch sort of chose the opposite approach, which was obviously the market's open, it's traded on publicly, but they're deciding to have the thing they're setting is the price, they want to be stable. So what changes is the dividend, right? So you can think of that as sort of like a country that is pegging the currency, right? But has interest rates that depend on the Federal Reserve, right? So countries that peg to the dollar, their central banks don't get to choose what they do with their interest rates. They have to choose. They have to do what the Fed does. So that's the trilemma, and this is typically a sovereign central bank sort of phenomenon. But I think it's interesting to think about the preferred instruments through that same lens.
Second question, adoption of another country, for example.
Bitcoin adoption for another country when it comes to corporate adoption.
Bitcoin adoption at the sovereign level in Japan? Is that?
Yeah, in Japan compared to, for example,
My originally born when I was born in Indonesia, so it's getting there, but of course there doesn't have any privilege that Japan has when it comes to like monetary policy.
Yeah, I think the Bitcoin adoption is sort of a long march. It's a marathon. Everybody sort of expects a sprint. You figure out Bitcoin for yourself, and you think it's going to happen really, really fast. But this is a long process. Institutions, need to change, and especially whether you're a democracy or whatnot, these things take time. And so, I think this is happening kind of from the bottom up in the capital markets. So, individuals, public companies, sovereign wealth funds, pensions, etc. And then all the way up to governments. But I think this is something that's going to take a while, and that's where there's still the opportunity. One more question?